Good evening. What unfolded on the Eastern Front in the past 48 hours is something the Kremlin did not anticipate, something Russian commanders were not prepared for, and something the United States and Europe quietly view as one of the most consequential battlefield shocks of the entire war. Ukraine launched a sudden, coordinated, precision attack that inflicted heavy losses on Russian forces, losses significant enough that the reverberations spread quickly from the trenches to Moscow's political circles. And for the first time in months, Russian leadership found itself scrambling, confused, and publicly contradicted by its own regional commanders. This attack was not simply another strike. It was a moment that exposed deep cracks in Russian planning, logistics, and operational discipline. And in the logic of great power conflict, when a state suffering from internal fractures absorbs a sudden defeat, its leadership enters a zone of instability that can produce dangerous, unpredictable decisions. The attack itself was not launched from a direction Russia expected. For weeks, Russian intelligence believed Ukraine lacked the manpower, the drones, the ammunition, and the surveillance coverage to mount any bold counteraction. Moscow's analysts assumed Kiev had shifted to a defensive posture. They assumed Ukrainian brigades were too exhausted to maneuver. They assumed American delays in military aid meant Ukraine's capacity to coordinate large-scale operations had degraded. These assumptions were wrong, fatally wrong, because Ukraine, quietly, methodically, and with a level of coordination surpassing what many expected, prepared a strike that targeted Russia's most vulnerable point, a command and logistics cluster that Moscow had grown complacent about protecting. The Ukrainian operation began with a series of deep reconnaissance flights using Western-supplied drones and domestically modified systems that evaded Russian air defenses by flying low, slow, and in irregular paths. These drones did not strike. They watched, they mapped, they collected electronic signatures, vehicle movement patterns, rotation schedules, and even the timing of officer briefings. By the time Ukraine finalized its attack plan, it knew exactly when Russian units were most exposed, when commanders were present, and when air defense scanners were at their weakest. The attack came at dawn, a moment chosen not for symbolic impact, but because Russian units are statistically least alert during the transition between night and day. Ukraine's first wave targeted communication nodes, effectively blinding the Russian brigade responsible for coordinating 3 adjacent sectors. Within minutes, radio silence and conflicting signals forced Russian units to rely on outdated backup channels that were slow, vulnerable, and often jammed by Ukrainian electronic warfare teams. This was the first sign of the chaos to come. The second wave was the real blow. Precision strikes using long-range drones equipped with warheads designed not to destroy entire buildings, but to collapse the specific rooms where commanders were located. This tactic is surgical, and Ukraine didn't just neutralize officers, it decapitated entire decision-making layers. Russian forces suddenly found themselves without command, without cohesion, and without the central coordination required to repel an attack that came faster than their defensive grid could react. Then came the ground assault. Ukrainian forces advanced not in a large wave, but through multiple small units, moving through forest belts, ravines, and abandoned trench lines Russia assumed were unusable. These Ukrainian forces didn't rush forward, they infiltrated. And within an hour, they had broken into the first Russian line, forcing Moscow's troops to retreat in disorganized clusters. The footage, though limited, shows clear signs of panic, units abandoning armored vehicles, artillery teams leaving ammunition stockpiles behind, and officers attempting to regroup soldiers who no longer had a clear sense of where to hold. The losses Russia suffered were significant, not just in personnel, but in equipment and structure. Ukraine hit fuel depots, mobile command posts, drone control stations, and several key artillery units that had been pounding Ukrainian towns for weeks. The numbers being discussed internally in Moscow are far higher than what Russian state media will ever admit. And the true impact of these losses is not the body count, it is the strategic disorientation now spreading through the Kremlin. Because Russia's entire war effort depends on projecting an image of momentum, control, and inevitability. Every speech from Russian leadership frames the conflict as slow but certain victory. Every statement insists Ukraine is running out of strength. Every announcement claims Western support is fading. This sudden Ukrainian attack shatters that narrative. And when propaganda fractures, political stability cracks with it. Inside Moscow, according to multiple Western intelligence services, the immediate reaction was confusion. Regional commanders gave conflicting reports. The Ministry of Defense downplayed the situation. Internal units argued over whether the loss was due to Ukrainian skill, Russian incompetence, or sabotage. None of this stayed contained. It leaked upward. And within hours, high-level Kremlin advisors were demanding briefings that frontline commanders were unable to provide. This is a pattern we only see when a state is caught off guard. From a realist standpoint, this Ukrainian strike is significant not simply because it inflicted heavy losses, but because it reveals something about Russia's military that the Kremlin desperately hoped to conceal. The Russian system is brittle. It cracks under pressure. It struggles to absorb surprises. It cannot adapt quickly when exposed to fast-moving, decentralized attacks. And that is exactly the type of warfare Ukraine has learned to excel at. This brittleness spreads beyond the battlefield. It affects Russian politics. When a great power's military suffers an unexpected shock, its leaders face internal blame. Suddenly, generals begin pointing fingers. Advisors demand explanations. Intelligence agencies claim they warned about vulnerabilities. And the political center, Putin's inner circle, begins to feel the pressure. No great power, even an authoritarian one, is immune from internal instability when the narrative of inevitable success collapses. Now consider how this affects the war's broader trajectory. Russia relies heavily on artillery supremacy, coordinated logistics, and predictable rotation schedules. This Ukrainian attack disrupted all three. The strike not only destroyed equipment, it forced Russia to pull reinforcements from quieter sectors. It forced Russia to burn ammunition it had been stockpiling for future offensives. It forced Russia to reorganize brigade leadership structures mid-conflict. In a war of attrition, moments like this matter deeply, not because they end the war, but because they accelerate exhaustion. Ukraine, meanwhile, has learned to fight smart, not large. It uses limited resources to strike where Russia is weakest, not where Russia is strongest. And this approach, though slow, creates cumulative pressure. The Kremlin can hide casualties from the public, but it cannot hide the strain on its manpower pools. It cannot hide the fact that commanders are being replaced at an unprecedented rate. It cannot hide that its most experienced units are being worn down faster than they can be rebuilt. There is another dimension to consider, one that Western analysts understand clearly, but politicians rarely say publicly. Russia cannot sustain high operational losses indefinitely. It has manpower, yes. It can mobilize more soldiers, yes. But well-trained officers cannot be replaced at the same speed as raw recruits. Experienced artillery crews cannot be replaced quickly. Drone operators, reconnaissance teams, signal specialists, these are not roles you fill by sending untrained conscripts to the front. When Ukraine hits these nodes, it damages Russia's war machine at a structural level. This sudden Ukrainian attack did exactly that. It didn't just hit tanks or trucks. It hit systems, command systems, communication systems, coordination systems, and the Kremlin now knows it. This is why you see signs of chaos emerging inside Russia, fractures between military factions, disagreements between the defense ministry and field commanders, panicked adjustments in troop deployments, rushed reinforcements being sent to compensate for losses. This is not the behavior of a confident power. This is the behavior of a state realizing it has vulnerabilities far deeper than it admitted. And this puts the United States in an interesting position. Washington did not expect Ukraine to pull off an operation of this scale right now. American intelligence believed Ukraine was conserving resources, preparing for a long defensive season. But the success of this strike signals something the U.S. now must consider seriously. Russia is not as stable in this war as it appears. And when a nuclear-armed great power becomes strategically unstable, the risk of escalation increases, not because it wants escalation, but because it fears defeat. The Kremlin fears nothing more than the image of losing control. And this sudden attack has created precisely that image, not fully, not publicly, but internally, where it matters most. Russia is facing a moment of strategic embarrassment. Ukraine is demonstrating adaptation under pressure. And the United States is watching a battlefield shock ripple all the way into Moscow's political structure. This war is entering a more dangerous phase, one defined not by stable fronts, but by surprise, disruption, and internal chaos. Russia suffered heavy losses. The Kremlin is in disarray, and the consequences of this moment will shape every decision that comes next.